The penthouse on the 87th floor of the Aurora Tower wasn't just a home, it was a stage. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the space like a glass crown, showing off the glittering skyline of New York City below. Inside, the air smelled faintly of expensive cigars, French champagne, and gardenias flown in that morning from Ecuador. Crystal chandeliers cast soft golden light over guests dressed in silk, tailored wool, and diamonds that probably cost more than most people's houses. It was one of those nights where money didn't just talk, it sang, danced and toasted itself with vintage Dom Perignon. The host, a man known more for his sharp tongue than his generosity, stood near the grand piano in the center of the room. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself like someone who owned the air everyone else breathed. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly pressed, and his cufflinks were shaped like tiny satellites because, of course, he owned 3 of them. He'd thrown this party under the pretense of raising money for urban youth arts programs, but everyone knew it was really just another chance to show off his latest acquisitions. A Basquiat sketch, a prototype electric jet, and most recently, this custom-built Steinway piano that had been flown in from Hamburg just for tonight. Laughter bubbled through the room as guests sipped cocktails and made deals disguised as small talk. A famous actress leaned against the marble bar, whispering into her phone. A venture capitalist argued passionately about blockchain, while gesturing with a shrimp skewer. Near the balcony, 2 tech founders compared net worths like they were trading baseball cards. Then the host raised his glass. "All right, listen up," he called out, his voice smooth but commanding. The chatter quieted. He grinned, clearly enjoying the attention. "You all know I don't believe in fairy tales. No knights, no magic beans, and definitely no love at first sight." He paused for effect, letting a few chuckles ripple through the crowd. "But tonight I'm feeling generous, so here's a little game." He turned and tapped the glossy black surface of the piano. "This beauty? It's tuned to perfection. And right here," he pulled a sheet of music from his inside pocket and held it up, "is Chopin's Revolutionary Etude, one of the hardest pieces ever written. Fast, furious, and full of heartbreak." He scanned the room, eyes glinting with mischief. "So here's my offer. Anyone who can sit down and play this piece quite flawlessly, from memory or sheet, I don't care, and move me, I'll marry them on the spot." Silence. Then uproarious laughter. People clapped, whistled, even snorted into their drinks. It was clearly a joke. Everyone knew he'd never marry anyone, least of all over a piano stunt. He'd been quoted in Forbes last year saying marriage was a poorly structured merger with emotional overhead. Besides, the etude wasn't just difficult, it was legendary. Pianists trained for years just to attempt it without stumbling. And move him? The man hadn't cried since his first Tesla prototype caught fire. Still, a few guests played along. A socialite with bloodline older than the subway system strutted over, flipped her hair, and plunked out 3 clumsy notes before giving up with a dramatic sigh. A hedge fund manager tried next, pounding the keys like he was closing a trade, earning a few polite groans. The host just leaned against the piano, arms crossed, smirking like a cat who'd already eaten the canary. Near the service entrance, unnoticed by the glittering crowd, a man in a faded navy uniform quietly rolled a stainless steel cart, stacked with empty champagne flutes. His name tag read E. He moved with quiet efficiency, eyes down, gloved hands steady. He'd been working the night shift at Aurora Tower for 6 years, cleaning lobbies, mopping spills, emptying trash bins after parties like this one. He knew the rhythm of the rich: arrive loud, leave messier, never look you in the eye. But tonight he'd paused just inside the doorway when the music talk started. He'd heard the host's challenge, and when the sheet music was held up, his breath caught just slightly. He knew that piece, not just knew it, lived it. He'd first played it at age 14 in a cramped recital hall with peeling paint and a piano missing 2 keys. His teacher had said, "This piece isn't about speed, it's about rage turned into beauty." He'd played it the night his mother was diagnosed. Played it again when the hospital bills started piling up like unread novels. Played it in his head every time he scrubbed a bathroom floor or wiped down a conference table, just to keep the music alive inside him. Now, as another guest fumbled through the opening bars and gave up with a shrug, someone near the back shouted, "Hey, what about the janitor? He's been staring at that piano all night." Heads turned. A few people laughed. Someone else added, "Yeah, come on. Give it a shot, buddy." "What have you got to lose?" The host raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by the idea. He glanced toward the service door and spotted the man in the uniform. For a second, their eyes met. The janitor looked away quickly, but it was too late. "All right," the host said, waving a hand like he was granting a wish to a stray dog. "Go ahead, humor us. Show us what you've got." The room fell into a different kind of silence, curious, condescending, waiting for the punchline. The janitor hesitated. His heart pounded. He could just say no, walk away, finish his rounds. No one would blame him. But then he thought of his mother, asleep in her small apartment across the river. Her breathing steady thanks to the medicine he paid for with these late-night shifts. He thought of the piano in the community center, where he'd once practiced for free, before it got sold to pay for new security cameras. He thought of all the times he'd swallowed his pride to keep food on the table. He set his cart aside. Slowly, he walked across the marble floor, his worn boots clicking softly against the stone. The crowd parted slightly, not out of respect, but like they were making room for a curious animal at the zoo. He stopped in front of the piano. Without a word, he pulled off his rubber gloves and tucked them into his pocket. Then he sat. The bench was cool and smooth beneath him. The keys gleamed under the chandelier light, ivory and ebony, perfect and untouched. He placed his hands over them, fingers slightly calloused from years of mopping and lifting, but still long and graceful. He closed his eyes for just a heartbeat, and then he began. The first notes weren't loud. They were quiet, almost hesitant, but precise, like raindrops before a storm. Then within seconds, his hands exploded into motion. The left hand thundered out a rolling, relentless bass line while the right danced across the treble with lightning speed and heartbreaking clarity. It wasn't just notes, it was fury, sorrow, defiance, hope, all woven together in a storm of sound. The laughter died instantly. People stopped mid-sip. Conversations froze. Even the string quartet in the corner, who'd been playing softly in the background, lowered their instruments, stunned. The host's smirk vanished. His arms dropped to his sides. He took a half-step back as if physically pushed by the music. The janitor didn't look up. He was lost in the piece now, in the memory of his teacher's voice, in the feel of his mother's hand on his shoulder after his first recital. His body swayed slightly with the rhythm, his shoulders relaxed, his face calm, like this was the only place in the world he truly belonged. The etude built to its climax, a cascade of notes so fast and intense it sounded like a heartbeat racing towards something inevitable. And then just as suddenly it softened. The final chords were gentle, almost apologetic, like someone whispering, "I'm still here," after a long silence. When the last note faded into the air, the room stayed completely silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just the hum of the city far below. Then from somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was the elderly woman who'd been sitting alone near the fireplace, the one who'd donated millions to music schools but rarely spoke at these events. She clapped slowly, deliberately. After a beat, another joined, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding, not the polite golf clap of high society, but real, stunned, emotional applause. The janitor opened his eyes. He blinked as if waking from a dream. He looked around, surprised by the sound. Then, without a word, he stood up, gave a small, awkward nod, and walked quickly back toward his cart. "Wait," the host called out, his voice sharper now, urgent. But the janitor didn't stop. He grabbed his gloves, slipped them back on, and pushed his cart toward the service elevator. The doors slid open, and he stepped inside just as the crowd began to surge forward with questions. Cameras, business cards. The elevator doors closed. Upstairs, the party slowly returned to its glittering rhythm. But something had shifted. The music felt hollow now, the laughter forced. People kept glancing at the piano, then at the closed service door, as if trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. Down in the basement, the janitor leaned against the cold metal wall of the elevator car, breathing deeply. His hands trembled slightly. He hadn't played like that in years. Not in front of anyone, and he wasn't sure he ever would again. But for those 3 minutes, he hadn't been the guy who cleaned up after Billionaires. He'd been exactly who he was always meant to be. Back in the penthouse, the host stood alone by the piano, staring at the empty bench. The sheet music lay forgotten on the floor. For the first time in a long time, he felt small. Not because of the money or the power he lacked, but because he'd just seen something real, raw, and beautiful. And he hadn't even known to look for it. He picked up the sheet music, smoothed it out, and placed it carefully on the piano lid. Then he poured himself a glass of water, no champagne, and walked to the window, watching the city lights blink below like distant stars. Somewhere down there, a man in a janitor's uniform was riding the subway home, humming a Chopin melody under his breath, already thinking about tomorrow's shift and the billionaire. He couldn't stop thinking about the sound of those hands on the keys, rough from work but gentle with the music. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed. Not because of a marriage proposal, but because of a truth he couldn't unhear. Genius doesn't wear a tuxedo. Sometimes it wears a uniform with a name tag that just says E. The next morning, the city woke up gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made everything feel a little heavier. Inside a small apartment in Queens, tucked between a laundromat and a bodega that sold empanadas for $2, a man sat at a kitchen table with a chipped mug of coffee. Steam curled from the rim, but he barely noticed. His hands, still sore from last night's performance, rested on the table, palms up, as if checking they were real. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the piano, the crowd, the way the billionaire's face had gone from smug to stunned. He kept replaying it, wondering if he'd made a mistake. Not because he regretted playing, but because he'd let himself be seen. For years, he'd kept his music locked away, like a secret he wasn't allowed to share. Now it was out there, floating in the air of that penthouse, and he had no idea what would happen next. His mother called from the other room. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," he said, walking over and gently pushing her wheelchair closer to the window so she could see the rain. She smiled, her eyes tired but warm. She'd been sick for a long time. First her legs, then her lungs, but she never complained. She'd worked double shifts as a nurse for 30 years, saving every spare dollar for his piano lessons. When the bills got too high and the scholarships ran out, she'd told him, "Don't stop playing. Just hide it for now. The world will find you when it's ready." He wasn't sure the world was ready, but last night part of it had looked right at him. Meanwhile, across the river in a penthouse still littered with empty champagne flutes and crumpled napkins, the billionaire sat alone on his balcony. He hadn't gone to bed either. He'd replayed the security footage from the party 3 times, zooming in on the janitor's hands, the way his shoulders moved, the quiet focus in his eyes. He'd even called the building manager. "Who's the night janitor?" he'd asked. "Elias," the manager had said. "Quiet guy. Always on time. Never causes trouble. Where's he from? Used to live in the Bronx, now he's in Queens. Takes the 6 train. Works 6 nights a week. And before this job?" Long pause. He was in music school. Juilliard, I think. Dropped out about 10 years ago. Family stuff." The billionaire had hung up slowly. Juilliard. The name hit him like a punch. He'd met plenty of Juilliard graduates, composers, conductors, concert pianists, but never one mopping floors in his building. It didn't make sense, or maybe it made too much sense. Maybe life just didn't care how talented you were if the bills kept coming. He spent the morning doing something he rarely did, asking questions without an agenda. He called a friend who ran a classical radio station. "Ever hear of a pianist named Elias Carter?" The friend laughed. "Carter? Yeah, I remember him. Teen prodigy. Won the Young Artist competition at 16. Played at Carnegie Hall's smaller stage, then, poof, disappeared. We all thought he'd gone overseas or something. He's cleaning my building." Silence. Then softly, "Well, I'll be damned." By noon, the billionaire wasn't thinking about satellites or stock prices. He was thinking about a man who could make a piano cry, and who chose to spend his nights wiping down conference tables instead. That evening, the janitor returned to work as usual. Same uniform, same cart, same quiet walk through the service entrance. But this time, people noticed him. The security guard gave him a nod that lasted a second too long. The daytime receptionist, who usually ignored him, said, "Hey, heard you played last night." He just nodded and kept walking. Inside the building, whispers followed him like shadows. "That's him. The piano guy. Can you believe it?" He kept his head down, focused on his tasks, emptying trash, refilling soap dispensers, wiping fingerprints off glass doors. But he could feel their eyes. It made his skin itch. Around midnight, as he was mopping the lobby, the elevator dinged. He didn't look up at first. But then he saw polished black shoes step out. Expensive, familiar. He froze. The billionaire stood there, not in a suit this time, but in dark jeans and a simple sweater. No entourage, no smirk. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept. "Hey," the billionaire said, voice lower than usual. The janitor nodded but didn't speak. "I wanted to say, what you did last night, it was incredible. Truly." Still silence. "I looked you up," the billionaire continued, stepping closer but keeping his distance. "I know about Juilliard. I know why you left." The janitor finally looked up. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. "Then you know I'm not looking for anything." "I'm not offering charity," the billionaire said quickly. "I'm offering a chance. A recording deal. A comeback tour. I've got contacts, labels, agents, venues. You could be back on stage in 6 months." The janitor shook his head. "I've got a job. I've got my mom. That's enough." "It's not about money," the billionaire insisted. "It's about your gift. The world deserves to hear it. My world hears it," the janitor said quietly. "She's the only audience I need." He turned back to his mop, signaling the conversation was over. But the billionaire didn't leave. He stood there for a long moment, watching the man work, watching the way his hands gripped the mop handle, strong and steady. The same hands that had danced across piano keys like they were breathing. "All right," the billionaire said finally. "But can I ask one thing?" The janitor paused. "Play again. Just once, for me. Not in a party. Not for a crowd, just in an empty room." The janitor looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. He saw something unexpected, not arrogance, but curiosity. Maybe even humility. "I don't play on command," he said. "I know," the billionaire replied. "But if you ever feel like it." The piano's always there. He turned and walked back to the elevator. This time the janitor watched him go. Over the next few weeks, something strange happened. The billionaire started showing up at odd hours. Not late at night, but early mornings, weekends, even holidays. He'd sit in the empty lobby with a coffee, reading or working on his laptop. He never spoke unless spoken to. He never asked for anything, but every time he left, he'd place a single sheet of music on the bench of the grand piano in the penthouse. A simple piece. Nothing flashy. Bach, Debussy, Gershwin. Always with a sticky note that just said, "Thought you might like this." The janitor never touched them. At first. But one rainy Tuesday, after a long shift and a call from the hospital about his mother's medication costs going up again, he found himself standing in front of the piano. The building was empty. The city was quiet. And the sheet music on the bench was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, his mother's favorite. He sat down. He didn't play for anyone. He played for himself, for her. For the years he'd kept the music locked away. His fingers moved slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The notes filled the room like warm light. Unbeknownst to him, the billionaire was watching from the hallway, hidden behind a half-open door. He didn't record it. Didn't interrupt. Just listened, eyes closed as if hearing music for the first time. After that, the janitor began playing more often, always late, always alone. Sometimes just a few minutes, sometimes an hour. And every time the billionaire would find a new piece of music waiting the next day, like a quiet conversation written in notes instead of words. One evening, the janitor found a handwritten note tucked into the sheet music. It wasn't about deals or fame. It just said, "Thank you for reminding me that some things can't be bought." He folded the note and put it in his pocket. Meanwhile, the billionaire started changing too. He canceled a flashy product launch to attend a small community concert in the Bronx. He donated anonymously to a music program at a public school. He even started learning piano himself, badly, awkwardly, but with real effort. His teacher said he had no natural talent, but he practiced every day. "He's not doing it to impress anyone," she told a friend. "He just wants to understand." Back in Queens, the janitor's mother noticed the change in him too. "You seem lighter," she said one night as he helped her into bed. "I played today," he admitted. She smiled. "I knew you would. Music doesn't stay buried forever." He kissed her forehead and turned off the light. But before he left the room, she said, "Don't be afraid of being seen, mijo. Your hands were made for more than mops." He didn't answer. But that night, for the first time in years, he dreamed of a stage, not a penthouse, not a gala, but a simple hall filled with kids, all watching him with wide eyes as he played. The next morning, he found a new envelope on the piano bench. Inside was a ticket to a small concert hall downtown, and a note. They're looking for someone to play at a benefit next month. No cameras, no press, just music. I told them about you. You don't have to say yes, but I think you should. He held the ticket in his hand for a long time. Then he slipped it into his uniform pocket, right next to the folded note from weeks ago. He didn't say yes that day, but he didn't throw it away either. And for the first time, the idea of playing in front of people again didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a promise. To his younger self, to his mother, to the music that had never stopped living inside him, even when the world wasn't listening. The ticket sat in the janitor's pocket for 3 days. He didn't look at it, didn't throw it away, just let it rest there. Like a seed waiting for the right kind of rain, every time he reached for his keys or his bus pass, his fingers brushed against it. And a quiet hum would rise in his chest, not fear, not excitement, just something in between. Like the first note of a song you haven't played in years but still remember by heart. His mother noticed. She always did. One evening, as he helped her with dinner, chopping onions, stirring soup, she said, "You've been quieter than usual." He shrugged. "Just tired." She gave him that look, the one that said she knew better but wouldn't push. Instead, she changed the subject. "Did you hear the community center's piano got fixed? The one with the sticky C-sharp?" He paused. "Yeah, I heard. They're looking for someone to play at the kids' recital next week. Just background music while they do their little dances." He didn't answer right away, but later that night after she was asleep, he took the ticket out of his pocket. He smoothed it on the kitchen table under the dim light. The concert hall was small, only 200 seats, and the cause was real. Raising money for music teachers in underfunded schools. No cameras, no red carpet, just a stage, a piano, and people who actually cared about sound, not spectacle. The next morning, he didn't go to the building manager. He didn't call anyone. He just walked into the penthouse during his shift, found the billionaire sitting alone by the window with a cup of tea, and placed the ticket on the coffee table. The billionaire looked up, surprised. "I'll do it," the janitor said simply. The billionaire didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just nodded like this was the most natural thing in the world. "Good," he said. "I'll handle the rest," and he did, quietly, carefully, no press releases, no social media posts. He even arranged for a car to pick the janitor up the night of the concert. Nothing flashy, just a clean black sedan with a driver who didn't ask questions. The day of the performance, the janitor spent the morning cleaning the usual floors, emptying the usual bins. But his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about what to play, not just the etude, that was a storm. This needed to be something warmer, something that said, "I'm still here," without shouting it. He decided on a piece he'd written himself years ago, back when he still believed music could fix everything. It started soft, like footsteps in snow, then built into something hopeful, like sunrise after a long night. He hadn't played it for anyone, not even his mother. But tonight felt right. That evening, as he stepped into the small concert hall downtown, he felt none of the nerves he'd expected. The space smelled like old wood and floor wax. Folding chairs were set up in neat rows. A few kids ran around backstage, giggling. A woman with silver hair and tired eyes, clearly the organizer, greeted him with a warm handshake. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We don't have much, but we're grateful," he nodded. "I'm glad to be here." Backstage, the piano was older than the one in the penthouse, its finish worn, one pedal a little loose, but it had soul. He sat down, tested a few keys. The sound was honest, real, not perfect but alive. From the wings, the billionaire watched. He hadn't told anyone he'd be here. He sat in the very back row wearing a plain coat, hood up slightly like any other stranger. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to hear what happened next. When the lights dimmed and the host introduced the mystery performer, a ripple of curiosity went through the crowd. Some had heard rumors, whispers about a janitor who played like a ghost from another time. Others just came for the cause and stayed out of politeness. Then the janitor walked on stage. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo, just dark slacks and a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. No bow, no grand entrance. He simply sat, placed his hands on the keys, and began. The first notes were so quiet people leaned forward to hear. Then the melody unfolded. Gentle at first, then rising like a voice finally finding its strength. It wasn't flashy. It didn't try to impress. It just told a story of loss, of work, of love that doesn't need an audience to be real. Halfway through, a little girl in the front row stopped fidgeting. Her eyes widened. She tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "He sounds like my piano teacher, but better." In the back, the billionaire closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deals or data or how to win. He was just listening. And in that moment, he understood something he'd spent a lifetime missing. Talent isn't rare. But the chance to share it? That's the miracle. When the piece ended, the room didn't erupt in applause right away. There was a beat of silence, deep, respectful, full. Then slowly people stood, not because they were told to, but because they had to. Even the kids clapped, wide-eyed and serious. Afterward, a man in a rumpled suit approached the stage. He introduced himself as a producer from a small but respected classical label. "I've been looking for someone like you for years," he said. "Not a performer, a storyteller. Would you consider recording?" The janitor hesitated. "I have responsibilities." "Of course," the man said quickly. "We'd work around your schedule and we'd cover your mother's medical care, fully, for as long as she needs it." That stopped him. He looked out into the crowd, searching. His eyes found the billionaire in the back who gave the tiniest nod, not of approval but of support. The janitor took a breath. "All right," he said, "but only if the first album goes to schools. Free copies. For kids who can't afford lessons." The producer smiled. "Done." Later, outside the hall, the rain had started again, soft, steady. The janitor stood under the awning, watching droplets race down the streetlights. The billionaire walked up beside him, hands in his pockets. "You were incredible," he said. The janitor shook his head. "I just played." "That's the point," the billionaire replied. "You didn't perform. You shared. There's a difference." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the city breathe. "I used to think everything had a price," the billionaire said after a while. "A value I could calculate. But tonight, I saw something that doesn't fit on a spreadsheet." The janitor glanced at him. "What's that?" "Dignity," the billionaire said, "and the kind of courage it takes to keep your light burning, even when no one's looking." The janitor didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Back home, his mother was waiting up, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea cooling on the table. "How'd it go?" she asked. He sat beside her. "They liked it." She studied his face, saw the quiet pride, the relief, the weight lifting just a little. "Good," she said. "Now you can stop hiding." He smiled faintly. "I wasn't hiding. I was waiting." "For what?" "For someone to listen." And now someone had. Over the next few weeks, life didn't change overnight, but it began to shift like a river finding a new path. The janitor kept his job. He still mopped floors and emptied trash. But now on his breaks, he'd sit at the piano in the empty penthouse and practice. Sometimes the billionaire would join him, not to play, but just to listen. Sitting quietly in a corner chair with a notebook, scribbling ideas that had nothing to do with business. One afternoon, the billionaire asked, "Why did you stop?" After Juilliard, I mean. The janitor didn't look up from the keys. "My mom got sick. Insurance didn't cover half of it. I sold my piano to pay for her first round of treatment. Then I got this job. One thing led to another, and you never went back?" "I tried. But by then I felt out of place. Like I didn't belong in those concert halls anymore. Like I'd lost the right." "You never lose the right," the billionaire said softly. "You just forget you have it." The janitor finally looked at him. "Why do you care so much?" The billionaire was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because I spent my whole life building things that disappear. Apps, trends, companies that get bought and forgotten. But music? That stays. And seeing you play, it reminded me that some things matter more than being seen. They just matter." It was the most honest thing the janitor had ever heard him say. As the recording sessions began, held late at night in a quiet studio downtown, the janitor found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He played old pieces, new ones, even fragments of songs he'd hummed while cleaning. The producer didn't rush him, didn't push for perfection, just said, "Play like no one's listening." And for the first time, he could. Meanwhile, the billionaire started using his influence differently. He quietly funded piano repairs in 10 public schools. He partnered with a nonprofit to provide free sheet music. He even convinced a few of his wealthy friends to sponsor music scholarships, not for prodigies, but for kids who just loved to play. He never took credit, never posted about it online. He just did it. One evening as they walked out of the studio together, the janitor asked, "Why are you doing all this?" The billionaire shoved his hands in his coat pockets. "Because I finally understand something. I didn't discover you. You were always there. I just wasn't paying attention." The janitor smiled. "Most people never do." "But I'm trying now," the billionaire said. "And maybe that's enough." Back in Queens, the janitor's mother listened to the rough recordings on an old CD player. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "You sound like your father," she said. "He used to play for me in the kitchen." Same feeling. He hugged her tight. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was becoming, and the billionaire? He still lived in his penthouse, still ran his companies, still wore expensive shoes, but something inside him had softened. He no longer measured success in headlines or net worth. He measured it in quiet moments, like hearing a janitor play Chopin in an empty room, or watching a kid in a Bronx classroom press a piano key for the first time. The world hadn't changed, but two men in it had, and that was enough to start something new. The morning of the big recital, the city felt different, like it was holding its breath. Gray clouds hung low over the skyline, but the air was still, quiet, as if even the traffic knew something special was about to happen. In a modest apartment in Queens, a man stood in front of his closet, staring at two shirts. One was the same button-down he'd worn to the small benefit concert weeks ago. The other was new, deep blue, soft cotton, bought with his first advance from the recording deal. He ran a hand over the fabric. It felt strange, like wearing someone else's skin. His mother watched from her wheelchair near the window. "Wear the new one," she said gently. "You've earned it." He nodded but didn't answer right away. He wasn't nervous about playing. He'd done that part 1,000 times in his head, in empty rooms, in dreams. What made his stomach twist was the idea of walking onto a real stage again, under bright lights, in front of strangers who might expect something he wasn't sure he could give. "You don't have to do this," she said, as if reading his mind. He turned to her. "Yes, I do. Why?" "Because if I don't," he said slowly, "then all those years of silence were for nothing." She reached out and he took her hand. Her skin was thin, her grip weaker than it used to be, but her eyes were steady. "Then go remind them what music really is." Across town, in a sleek office high above Midtown, the billionaire stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. On his desk sat 2 tickets to tonight's concert, front row. He hadn't invited anyone, not investors, not celebrities, not even his closest advisors. Just him, and maybe, if he was lucky, a quiet seat in the back where no one would notice him. He'd spent the last month finalizing plans for something bigger than either of them had imagined. A foundation to bring music education back to schools that had cut their arts programs years ago. Pianos, violins, sheet music, teacher salaries, all funded quietly without logos or press releases. He'd even convinced a few rival tech leaders to chip in, not because they cared about music, but because he'd shown them data. Kids in music programs did better in math, stayed in school longer, felt less alone. But none of that mattered tonight. Tonight was about one man, one piano, and the truth that had been buried under years of mopping floors and swallowing pride. By early evening, the concert hall, a modest but elegant space with warm wood walls and velvet seats, began to fill. Not with the glittering crowd from the penthouse gala, but with teachers, students, parents, and a few curious music lovers who'd heard whispers about the janitor who plays like a ghost. There were no cameras, no red carpet, just a simple program handed out at the door that read, "An evening of music and hope, featuring a special guest." Backstage, the janitor sat on a folding chair, eyes closed, breathing slowly. His hands rested on his knees, calm now. The new shirt felt less foreign. He'd brought his own sheet music, handwritten, slightly smudged, but he knew he wouldn't need it. The piece he'd chosen was stitched into his bones. It wasn't Chopin this time. It wasn't even classical. It was something he'd written over the past few weeks. a blend of jazz harmonies, gospel rhythms, and the quiet ache of a man who'd worked nights to keep his mother warm. He called it new second shift. The stage manager peeked in. 5 minutes, he nodded. No butterflies. Just focus. Out in the audience, the billionaire slipped into a seat near the back just as the lights began to dim. He didn't look around. Didn't check his phone. Just sat, hands folded, like a student waiting for a lesson. Then the spotlight hit the center of the stage. The janitor walked out slowly. No fanfare, no bow. He wore simple black slacks and the blue shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked like a man who'd spent his life working with his hands and proud of it. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, placed his fingers on the keys, and began. The first notes were low, rumbling, like the hum of a city at 3 a.m., when only the night workers are awake. Then a melody rose, warm and searching, like a lullaby for people who never got to sleep. His left hand kept a steady heartbeat-like rhythm while his right wove stories in sound. Of bus rides home in the rain, of hospital waiting rooms, of finding beauty in a quiet moment between chores. Halfway through, he shifted into a faster section, bright, playful, almost defiant. It sounded like laughter breaking through exhaustion. A few people in the audience leaned forward, eyes wide. A young girl in the third row closed her eyes and swayed slightly, as if she could feel the music in her chest. In the back, the billionaire didn't move. But tears gathered in the corners of his eyes. Not because it was sad, but because it was true. This wasn't performance. It was confession, and it was beautiful. When the final chord faded, soft, like a sigh of relief, the room stayed silent for a long moment. Then slowly, people began to stand, not all at once, but one by one, as if each person needed their own second to process what they'd just heard. Soon the entire hall was on its feet, clapping not out of politeness, but out of awe. The janitor stood, gave a small nod, and walked off stage without fanfare. Backstage, the producer from the record label was waiting, eyes shining. "That was it," he said. "That's the album." Every note. The janitor just nodded. He wasn't thinking about records or tours. He was thinking about his mother, probably listening to the live stream on her old laptop, smiling in her chair. Later, in the green room, there was a knock. The janitor opened the door to find the billionaire standing there, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said. They sat in silence for a while, sipping the 2 hot coffee, listening to the muffled sounds of the crowd outside. "You changed everything tonight," the billionaire finally said. "No," the janitor replied. "I just played. You're the one who gave me the room to do it." The billionaire shook his head. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. I just stopped blocking the light." They both smiled at that. Then the producer walked in with a man in a sharp suit, someone from a major international label, the kind that signs artists after one performance. He extended a hand. "That was the most honest music I've heard in 20 years, he said. "We want to release it worldwide. Tour, interviews, the works." The janitor didn't answer right away. He looked at the billionaire, then back at the producer. "On one condition," he said. "Name it. My mother's care is covered fully. For life. No fine print. No expiration." The executive didn't hesitate. "Done." "And," the janitor added, "the first 10,000 copies go to public schools, free, with lesson guides for teachers who might not know how to teach it." The man grinned. "Even better." After he left, the billionaire turned to the janitor. "You're really doing it?" "I have to," the janitor said. "Not for fame. But because if one kid hears this and thinks, maybe I'm not alone, then it's worth every note." That night, as they walked out of the concert hall together, the rain had stopped. The city glistened under streetlights, clean and new. A taxi slowed, but the janitor waved it off. "I'll take the train," the billionaire nodded. "Mind if I walk with you to the station?" They walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks. Then the billionaire said, "You know, I used to think success was about building something no one else could. But watching you tonight, I realized real success is helping someone else build what they were meant to." The janitor looked at him. "You're not so bad for a billionaire." They both laughed. Real, easy laughter, the kind that doesn't need an audience. At the subway entrance, the janitor paused. "Thanks for all of it." The billionaire shook his head. "Thank you." for reminding me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They parted ways, two men from different worlds, now tied together by something deeper than money or music. Respect. Back in Queens, the janitor's mother was waiting up. She didn't ask how it went. She just opened her arms. He hugged her tight, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was carrying the weight alone. Up in his penthouse, the billionaire didn't pour a drink or check his stocks. He sat at the grand piano, placed his fingers on the keys, and tried to play the opening notes of Kakeng's Second Shift. He fumbled, hit a wrong chord, laughed at himself. But he kept going, slowly, carefully, because now he understood. Music wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, even when you're scared, even when you're not ready. And somewhere between the subway ride home and the quiet hum of a city that never sleeps, the janitor knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, not just for him, but for every kid who'd been told their dream was too big for their circumstances. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to listen, and another to finally play. The benefit concert wasn't held in a grand hall this time, but in a converted gymnasium at a public high school in the Bronx. Folding chairs lined the scuffed wooden floor, and handmade posters with musical notes and rainbows hung from the walls. A banner above the stage read, "Every child deserves a song." The air smelled like floor wax, cafeteria pizza, and the faint sweetness of nervous excitement. Kids in mismatched outfits milled around, tuning violins, adjusting saxophone reeds, whispering to each other with wide eyes. This wasn't just a performance, it was a promise. At the center of it all sat a grand piano, donated just last month by a quiet foundation no one had heard of before. Its black finish gleamed under the gym lights, looking almost out of place among the basketball hoops and scuffed bleachers. But it belonged, more than it ever had in a penthouse. Backstage, really just a corner behind a curtain made of old bedsheets, the janitor adjusted his cuffs. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or even the blue shirt from last time. Just a simple white button-down, sleeves rolled like he was ready to work. Because in a way this wasn't about showing off. It was about showing up. For the kids who practiced in stairwells because their apartments were too small. For the teachers who bought reeds and strings out of their own paychecks. For the dreamers who'd been told music was a luxury they couldn't afford. His mother was there too. Seated in the front row in her wheelchair wrapped in a soft shawl, she'd insisted on coming, even though the doctor said she should rest. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," she'd said that morning, her voice firm despite the fatigue in her eyes. In the third row, near the aisle, the billionaire sat alone. No entourage. No fancy watch. Just a man in a plain coat holding a program like everyone else. He'd helped organize this event, not as a sponsor, but as a volunteer. He'd spent weeks calling schools, arranging instrument deliveries, even helping paint the banners. No one knew who he really was, and he liked it that way. The concert began with a student quartet, 2 violins, a cello, and a kid on a slightly out-of-tune piano, playing a simple folk melody. They made a few mistakes, but they played with heart. The audience clapped louder than they probably deserved, not out of pity, but because they recognized courage when they saw it. Then came a young girl, no older than 10, who sang an old spiritual with a voice so clear it made grown-ups wipe their eyes. After her, a group of teenagers performed a jazz number they'd written themselves, full of syncopated rhythms and bold improvisation. And then, finally, it was his turn. He walked on stage to warm, familiar applause, not the stunned silence of the penthouse, not the reverent standing ovation of the concert hall, but something quieter, deeper. These people weren't clapping because he was famous. They were clapping because they knew what he represented, proof that you don't have to come from privilege to belong in music. He sat at the piano, took a breath, and began. He didn't play the etude, didn't play Second Shift. Instead, he played a new piece, one he'd written just for tonight. It started with a simple melody, something a beginner could learn in a week. Then slowly other voices joined in, not from the piano but from the students. A violin echoed the theme. A flute wove around it. A cello added depth. One by one, the young musicians stepped forward, adding their sound to his until the whole gymnasium was filled with music that belonged to all of them. It wasn't perfect. A note cracked here, a rhythm slipped there, But it was alive, real, human. And in that moment, the janitor wasn't a janitor anymore. He wasn't even a pianist. He was a bridge between generations, between struggle and hope, between silence and song. When the last note faded, the room didn't erupt. It exhaled. Then slowly everyone stood, not just to applaud, but to honor what they'd just witnessed. Music as community, as healing, as belonging. Afterward, kids swarmed the stage. Not for autographs, but to ask questions. How do you keep your hand so steady? Did you ever want to quit? Can you show me that chord? He answered each one patiently, kneeling to meet them at eye level, his voice calm and kind. His mother watched from her seat, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. A teacher beside her handed her a tissue. He's giving them permission to dream, the teacher whispered. Yes, his mother said softly. He finally gave it to himself too. Later, as the crowd began to thin and volunteers started stacking chairs, the billionaire found him near the piano, carefully closing the lid. You did it, the billionaire said. We did it, the janitor corrected. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the distant sound of kids laughing in the hallway, still buzzing from the night. Then the billionaire reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder. I've been working on something, he said. I wanted to run it by you before I made it official. He opened the folder. Inside were plans, detailed, thoughtful, full of numbers and names of schools, but also sketches of music rooms, quotes from teachers, even a list of instruments needed. At the top, in bold letters, it read, The Open Key Foundation. It's not just about funding, the billionaire explained. It's about access, free lessons, repaired instruments, summer camps. And you'd be the face of it, not as a celebrity, but as a mentor. You'd visit schools, work with kids, help shape the programs. The janitor looked at the pages, then back at him. You're not asking me to be your partner. I'm asking you to lead, the billionaire said. I'll handle the money. You handle the soul, the janitor smiled. You've changed. So have you, the billionaire replied. You used to hide your gift. Now you're sharing it like it's oxygen. They both laughed, quiet, tired, happy. Then the janitor asked the question he'd been holding on to for weeks. You're not marrying me, are you? The billionaire blinked, then burst out laughing, a real deep laugh that echoed in the empty gym. Turns out I was the one who needed saving, he said, still chuckling. But if you'll have me, as a friend and partner, the janitor extended his hand. Deal. They shook on it, not with contracts or cameras, but with the kind of handshake that means something. Over the next few months, the foundation launched quietly. No press conferences, no viral videos, just pianos showing up at schools, sheet music appearing in mailboxes, and a man in a simple shirt walking into classrooms to sit beside kids who'd never touched a keyboard before. The janitor kept his job for a while, not because he needed to, but because it reminded him where he came from. Eventually, he transitioned to part-time, spending his days teaching, composing, and visiting schools across the city. His album became a quiet success, not topping charts, but finding its way into homes, classrooms, and hearts. His mother's health improved, thanks to the care the record deal had secured. She started attending every student recital, always in the front row, always clapping the loudest. As for the billionaire, he still ran his companies, but his priorities had shifted. He turned down a billion-dollar merger to fund a music wing at a struggling high school. He started taking piano lessons again, not to impress anyone, but because he finally understood that music wasn't about talent. It was about showing up, even when you're bad at it. One evening, months after the gymnasium concert, the two of them sat on a bench in a small park near the school. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. A group of kids walked by, laughing, one of them humming a tune from the janitor's album. You know, the billionaire said, I used to think legacy was about buildings with my name on them. And now? The janitor asked. Now I think it's about moments like this, he said, nodding toward the kids. When someone hears a song and feels less alone. That's the only thing that lasts. The janitor didn't answer right away. He just watched the kids disappear around the corner, their voices fading into the evening air. Then he said, You know what my teacher told me when I was a kid? Music isn't yours to keep. It's yours to pass on. The billionaire smiled. Guess we're both passing it on now. They sat in comfortable silence as the streetlights flickered on. No grand speeches, no dramatic endings. Just two men who'd found each other in the most unlikely place, a penthouse party, a mop bucket, a single offhand joke, and built something real from it. The world didn't change overnight. But in classrooms across the city, kids began to play. Not because they were prodigies, not because they had fancy teachers or expensive instruments, but because someone had shown them that music doesn't care about your job title, your bank account, or your past. It only asks one thing: will you listen? And if you do, it might just give you back your voice. Back home that night, the janitor sat at his own piano, a modest upright now, bought with his first royalty check, and played a simple lullaby. His mother listened from the next room, eyes closed, a soft smile on her lips, up in his penthouse. The billionaire sat at his grand piano and played the same lullaby, badly, but with feeling, and somewhere between those two rooms, in the quiet spaces where real life happens, a new kind of harmony began to grow, not built on wealth or fame, but on humility, respect, and the simple, powerful truth that everyone has a song worth hearing. No wedding bells, no fairy tale ending, just two lives changed by a single moment of courage. And the music that followed. The city had changed, not in the way skyscrapers rise or subway lines expand, but in the quiet hum of everyday life. You could hear it now in places you never used to. A middle school hallway during lunch break, where a kid tapped out rhythms on a cafeteria tray. A bus stop in Brooklyn, where two teenagers harmonized over a folk song they'd learned from a free online lesson. Even in the lobby of the Aurora Tower, where a small upright piano now sat near the front desk, labeled with a handwritten sign, "Play me." No permission needed. It had been 2 years since that night in the penthouse, the night a janitor sat down at a grand piano and rewrote the rules of what was possible. Since then, the ripple had spread wider than anyone expected. The Open Key Foundation wasn't just funding music programs, it was changing how people thought about who gets to make art. Teachers reported kids staying after school just to practice. Attendance in music classes had doubled in some districts, and every month a new school received a shipment of repaired instruments, each one tagged with a note. This was once forgotten. Now it's yours. But the real change wasn't in the numbers, it was in the faces. One rainy afternoon, the janitor, though he rarely called himself that anymore, stood in the back of a classroom in the South Bronx, watching a group of 7th graders fumble through a simple duet on two slightly out-of-tune keyboards. One boy kept missing the same chord, frustration tightening his shoulders. The janitor didn't step in right away. He remembered that feeling, the shame of getting it wrong while everyone watched. Instead, he walked over and sat beside him. "Try it slower," he said gently. "Music isn't a race. It's a conversation." The boy looked up surprised. "You mean I don't have to be perfect?" "No one is," the janitor said, smiling. "Not even me." He played the phrase himself just once, softly, then nodded for the boy to try again. This time the chord rang clear. The boy's eyes lit up like he'd unlocked a secret door. Later, as he walked out of the school, an envelope was waiting in his coat pocket. He opened it on the subway ride home. Inside was a letter from a high school in rural Ohio. Their music program had been cut 5 years ago. They'd heard about the foundation through a teacher's blog. Would he consider visiting? They had 10 kids who'd been teaching themselves piano on an old keyboard from the church basement. He folded the letter and tucked it into his bag. He'd say yes. He always did. Meanwhile, the billionaire, still wealthy, still powerful, but somehow quieter now, sat in a different kind of boardroom. Not glass and steel, but wood-paneled and warm, filled with music teachers, community leaders, and a few students. They were planning the foundation's next phase, mobile music studios, buses converted into rolling classrooms, stocked with instruments, recording gear, and internet access, ready to visit towns that couldn't afford a single piano. "We're not just giving tools," he said, leaning forward. "We're saying your voice matters, even if you live where no one's listening." A young teacher from Appalachia nodded. "My students think music is for cities. For rich kids. We need them to know it's for everyone. That's the point," the billionaire said. "Music doesn't care where you're from. It only asks if you're willing to show up." After the meeting, he walked to his car, but not before stopping by the building's lobby. He sat at the upright piano for a few minutes playing a simple scale, his fingers still clumsy but determined. A security guard passing by paused and smiled. "Getting better," he said. "Slowly," the billionaire replied. "But I'm still learning." That night, the janitor's mother celebrated her birthday. Not with a fancy party, but with homemade tamales, candles on the kitchen table, and a small group of neighbors who'd become like family. She was stronger now, walking short distances with a cane, laughing more than she had in years. The stress of medical bills was gone, replaced by the quiet joy of watching her son do what he was born to do. After cake, she handed him a small wrapped box. Inside was a metronome, old brass, slightly tarnished. "Your father used this," she said. "He carried it in his pocket everywhere, said it kept his heart in time." The janitor held it gently, thumb brushing the cool metal. "I didn't know he played." "He didn't," she said softly. "But he loved listening to me. And when you were born," he said, "our boy will need this more than I ever did." Tears welled in his eyes. He'd spent so long thinking his gift came from struggle, from sacrifice, but maybe it came from love all along. A few days later, the two men met at a small park near the river. It was early spring, and the trees were just beginning to bud. They sat on a bench sipping coffee from paper cups, watching a group of kids chase pigeons. "You ever miss the old days?" the janitor asked suddenly. "The penthouse parties? The deals? The feeling that I had to win everything?" The billionaire shook his head. "Not even a little. I thought I was building a legacy, but I was just stacking stones now. Now I feel like I'm planting trees." The janitor smiled. "Trees take time." "Yeah," the billionaire said. "But they give shade to people you'll never meet." They sat in silence for a while. Then the janitor said, "I got a letter from that school in Ohio. I'm going next week." "Want company?" the billionaire asked. "You'd fly all the way to Ohio just to watch me teach scales?" "I'd fly anywhere to watch someone find their voice," he said simply. And so they went. The town was small, population under 2,000, one main street, a diner that served pie with every meal. The high school had peeling paint and a gym that doubled as an auditorium. But the music room, once used for storage, had been cleaned out by students. Posters of jazz legends hung on the walls. A donated keyboard sat in the corner, and 10 kids waited nervously, standing in a half circle like they weren't sure if they belonged. The janitor didn't start with a performance. He started by asking questions. "Why do you want to play?" "Because it makes me feel calm," one girl said. "Because my grandma used to sing to me," said a boy. "Because no one listens to me." "But the piano does," whispered another. The billionaire stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes glistening. For 3 days, they worked together, learning chords, writing simple songs, even recording a rough track in the school's old computer lab. On the last day, the kids performed for their families in the gym. It wasn't polished, but it was full of heart. Afterward, the principal pulled the janitor aside. "You gave them more than music," she said. "You gave them permission to be seen." On the flight back, the billionaire stared out the window at the clouds below. "I used to think impact was measured in billions," he said quietly. "Now I know it's measured in moments like that." Back in the city, life returned to its rhythm, but a richer one. The janitor released his second album, this time featuring student musicians from the Foundation's programs. The billionaire quietly sold one of his luxury properties and used the funds to launch the first mobile music studio. It hit the road that summer, painted in bright colors, with a sign on the side that read, "Your song starts here." One evening, as the janitor helped his mother into bed, she said, "You've done it, you know." "Done what?" "Proved that kindness is louder than money." He kissed her forehead. "I didn't do it alone." "No," she agreed. "But you showed up when it mattered." The next morning he walked into the Aurora Tower, not as staff but as a guest. He passed the lobby piano where a young intern was nervously practicing a simple melody. He paused, listened, then gave her a small nod of encouragement before heading up. In the penthouse, the grand piano still stood by the window. The billionaire was there waiting, a folder in his hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "What if we do something even bigger?" The janitor raised an eyebrow. "Bigger than buses and schools? What if we build a place? A real home for music, open to anyone. No auditions, no fees. Just walk in, sit down, and play." The janitor looked out at the city skyline. "Where would we put it?" Right here, the billionaire said. We convert the top 2 floors. Soundproof rooms, practice spaces, a small stage for student recitals. Call it the Open Key Center. The janitor turned to him. You'd give up your penthouse for that? It was never really mine, the billionaire said. Not in the way that matters, but this could belong to everyone. They stood in silence, the city humming below them. Then the janitor smiled. Let's build it. And so they did, not overnight, not with fanfare, but brick by brick, note by note, heart by heart. The penthouse became a sanctuary, not for the wealthy, but for the willing. Kids came after school. Retirees played jazz on Sundays. Immigrants wrote songs in their native languages. And every evening, just before closing, someone would sit at the grand piano and play, sometimes Chopin, sometimes a lullaby, sometimes just a few notes that meant everything to someone listening. The billionaire still lived in the city, but in a smaller apartment now. He visited the center often, not as an owner, but as a student still practicing his scales, still learning. And the janitor? He still wore simple shirts, still took the subway, still made time for his mother. But now when he walked into a room, people didn't see a janitor or a celebrity. They saw someone who reminded them that your past doesn't define your future, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is play a song for someone who's forgotten how to hope.